Tonight at 10, history is made at the start of a new session of Parliament at Westminster. For the first time, the Prince of Wales took on the duty of unveiling the government's programme in the Queen's absence, with a prominent pledge to tackle the impact of rising prices.
Her Majesty's government's priority is to grow and strengthen the economy and help ease the cost of living for families.
Behind the smiles, a highly charged fight to win the voters' trust on helping households and rebuilding the economy.
We cannot simply spend our way out of this problem. We need to grow out of this problem.
It's the latest chapter in a pathetic response to the cost of living crisis.
We'll have the latest on that debate and what it tells us about the session ahead. Also tonight, Russia has targeted the Black Sea port of Odessa using what the Ukrainians say were hypersonic missiles. In Sri Lanka, security forces have been ordered to shoot anyone seen looting or damaging public property in the anti-government protests. And at the High Court, Rebecca Vardy denies leaking information to the press, and she gave evidence in her libel case against Colleen Rooney.
And later in the hour, we'll have Sports Day on the BBC News channel with all the latest reports, results, interviews and features from the BBC Sports Centre.
Good evening. At the state opening of Parliament, carried out for the first time by the Prince of Wales, the government at Westminster has promised to take further action to tackle the sharp rise in the cost of living. But the Prime Minister warned that the UK could not simply spend its way out of problems and that it was impossible to shield everyone, as he put it, from the effect of global inflation. Now, among the plans are developing the so-called levelling up strategy, boosting growth in the regions of England by giving local leaders more powers. There will be bills to tackle housing problems in England, including giving tenants more rights in the social housing sector. There are plans to remove more EU regulations, which ministers claim will save businesses £1 billion, as well as measures to improve energy security and to reduce carbon emissions. In response, Labour said the need for an emergency budget now was obvious, given the cost of living crisis, and they again demanded a windfall tax on energy companies to help give more money to households. Our political editor Chris Mason reports now on the day's events.
It's an occasion grounded in near timeless ritual and ceremony. There's a familiarity to it for even the occasional observer. Don't forget your sword when you get off the bus. Amid the familiar, a profound difference. This year, the national anthem in honour of a monarch not here. In her place, the Prince of Wales. Deputising today, a glimpse of the future too. Quiet weekend, the Prime Minister jokes with the Labour leader. Next, Minister's words read by the heir to the throne.
Her Majesty's government's priority is to grow and strengthen the economy and help ease the cost of living for families. A bill will be brought forward to drive local growth, empowering local leaders to regenerate their areas and ensuring everyone can share in the United Kingdom's success.
Among the planned new laws, building a chunk of the HS2 high-speed rail line between Crewe and Manchester and helping those in England who rent or live in social housing. And ministers want to make the most of Brexit.
Her Majesty's government will continue to seize the opportunities of the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union to support economic growth. Regulations on businesses will be repealed and reformed.
There was mention too of new police powers over disruptive protests and the hugely controversial plan to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda.
Her Majesty's ministers will take action to prevent dangerous and illegal channel crossings and tackle the criminal gangs who profit from facilitating it.
Order! After a morning of ceremony, an afternoon of politics. Labour reckon the plans aren't up to the scale of an economic crunch getting worse.
We need a government of the moment, with the ideas that meet the aspirations of the British public. This thin address, bereft of ideas or purpose, without a guiding principle or a roadmap for delivery, shows just how far this government is from that.
Ministers insist they are trying to ease the financial pain felt by so many and create the conditions for things to get better.
And above all, we're tackling the economic challenges with the best solution of all, and that's an ever-growing number of high-wage, high-skill jobs, Mr. Speaker. Jobs, jobs, jobs.
But there was a chorus of consistency from the opposition parties, claiming the government's simply not doing enough.
Scottish people know the cost of living with Westminster. We know the price we pay with the Prime Minister and the price of being stuck with a Tory government we didn't vote for. And it's a price none of us in Scotland, not one of us, can afford to pay any longer.
We know that families are desperately concerned about their energy bills into the future, that are worrying now about whether they'll be able to put food on the table. What is there to be able to make an immediate difference? And that's sadly wanting.
The political debate will march on, the arguments only just beginning, and the dividing lines very clear. But as for the ceremony, it's job done, and the bus home.
Well, let's go live to Westminster and join Chris there. Chris, there was a brief reference to one of the most serious challenges ahead, and that is to try to find a way forward in Northern Ireland. What did you make of that?
Yeah, that's right, Huw. It's the most deft of glancing references to what's known as the Northern Ireland Protocol. Some language there in the speech about the economic bonds that tie together the constituent parts of the UK. A reference, glancingly, to the protocol, that deal that was done to secure a Brexit arrangement that means that Northern Ireland stays in a closer economic relationship with the EU than the rest of the UK, and it means checks on some goods passing from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. A real frustration to the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland and to the government here. Now, we know that the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, doesn't want this situation to drag on. That said, today there wasn't a specific reference to legislate to try and get rid of some of the elements the government likes. That's something that periodically the government privately and publicly has threatened to do. On the one hand, they want to do something to try and restore devolved government to Northern Ireland. The Democratic Unionist Party want the protocol sorted as they see it in order to do that. On the other, they want to try and maintain a civil diplomatic relationship with the European Union. It's only a deal with the EU that can secure that change. A reminder on a day when the government talks up the benefits of Brexit, that sorting out the problems as it sees it of its Brexit deal is still very real.
Chris, many thanks again. Chris Mason, our political editor, with the latest analysis there. Let's stay with the Queen's speech because, as we mentioned, one of the measures announced today was the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, aimed at giving local authorities more powers to regenerate towns and cities throughout England. Our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth, has been to Stoke, one of the cities receiving millions of pounds of new government investment.
Stoke-on-Trent's heritage is imprinted on its skyline. Shaped by its ceramics industry, its economic fortunes have waxed and waned. Deprivation levels here are high. It's one of the places the government's promised to improve opportunity. At the Coachmakers Arms, landlord Rob was born and bred in Stoke, and he says he's heard such pledges before.
I've seen lots of talk about it, but no real action yet. We've seen hoardings go up before, we've seen signs go up before, but not seen anything happen yet. So, come on, let's see something built and being used.
There are plans to regenerate Stoke. The vision is bringing heritage sites back to use, improving city centre footfall, housing, education, skills, all backed by government funding. And in today's Queen's speech, a promise to tackle empty high street shops. But despite the plans, with prices rising, some say they're not yet feeling the improvement.
The north and south divide is always going to be there, isn't it? We're always going to be poorer, they're always going to be richer, and it's simple as that.
With the cost of living going up, poverty increases, therefore this issue increases, doesn't it? Look, you have waste blowing around, shops boarded up.
Addressing entrenched inequality does take time, but Boris Johnson has made this a central plank of his leadership, and funding promises and policy plans won't mean much until they start to make a difference in people's day-to-day lives. Stoke's leaders acknowledge real change will take time, but they say it has started.
I think it's a long-term vision, isn't it? Clearly, we're not going to level up places like Stoke-on-Trent in 12 months or 18 months. But to date, so far, what we've seen here as a place, across the things that we prioritise as being important, is starting to slowly make a difference. I can see change on the streets of Stoke-on-Trent in terms of hoardings going up around sites that were previously empty buildings and activity starting to happen within the business community.
Work's already underway to regenerate this once thriving pottery site. For Chris, who runs a cooking and education business here, there is cause for optimism.
I think people will judge it on the evidence. What I'm also interested in is, potentially there could be another government next year, and not only that, within government, ministers can change. What I want to see is a commitment to development of provincial towns and cities over time. Nationally, that's what we should be judging it on. Regionally and here in Stoke-on-Trent, we should be collectively dreaming of a better future.
But in the short term, the challenges are clear. And the political risk is, despite all the plans, people don't end up feeling better off anytime soon. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Stoke-on-Trent.
With me is our economics editor, Faisal Islam. Let's talk about the cost of living crisis. When you look at the package of measures that is already there and the one being put forward in today's measures, does it add up to a credible package to tackle the problem?
Well, there is a timing issue here. To put it bluntly, a Queen's speech is more about parliamentary bills than household bills. And that's because the sorts of measures we've heard about just there will take a year or so to be enacted, a year or so then to affect the economy. We're talking about those measures to up the performance of underperforming regions, as we've just been hearing, whether it's changing the way transport is structured, whether it's having an infrastructure bank or pursuing post-Brexit freedoms in data and financial services and trade deals. You're talking about medium-term, long-term, years to have an impact on productivity, wages and then growth. This energy bills challenge, it's not just about the next few weeks and months. It's already happening. It's immediate. We're already seeing it in the direct debits paid monthly by millions of households. The message we got more quietly from government is that they're still going to wait until they know how much these energy bills are going to go up in autumn before they can act on that, really. And then more subtly, don't imagine that this is the same sort of pain relief in terms of tens of billions that we got during the pandemic, that we can repeat that for the energy crisis. So you have a Queen's speech that's about long-term growth, and that has been proven elusive for many governments for many years.
Faisal, many thanks once again. Faisal Islam there, our economics editor. Well, today's state opening of Parliament marked the first time since 1963 that the Queen didn't attend. Her Majesty had authorised the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Cambridge to open the new parliamentary session, and as we saw, Prince Charles delivered the speech on the Queen's behalf, after Buckingham Palace explained last night that Her Majesty was suffering from episodic mobility problems. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell examines the significance of today's events.
He's been waiting for his destiny for longer than any other heir to the British throne. And while no one is suggesting that a major change is imminent, the inescapable fact is that a transition is underway. And this, today, was the most tangible sign of it. As Prince Charles took his place on the consort's throne, the imperial state crown, the symbol of the monarch's authority, was placed on a table beside him. The prince studied it closely, and then, with Lords and Commons assembled, a prince who's never been short of his own opinions took on the discipline required of a monarch, reading out the words written by the government.
The continued success and integrity of the whole of the United Kingdom is of paramount importance to Her Majesty's government.
It was this, the Regency Act of 1937, that the palace used to delegate the power to open Parliament. Yet nobody's suggesting a permanent transfer of the monarch's powers. The Queen is still busy with her paperwork and virtual audiences. Changes are happening, but they're gradual.
For the Queen, it's always been very important to carry out all her public duties in public whenever she can. She has famously said, to be seen is to be believed.
and she believes the monarchy must be seen, but in future it's likely that what we're going to see is other members of the royal family carrying out royal duties on her behalf.
For 7 decades, Britain has had a highly visible head of state. Those days are over. Realities are having to be faced. The burden is shifting. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Let's turn then to the conflict in Ukraine. Russia has targeted the Black Sea port of Odessa using what the Ukrainians say were hypersonic missiles which fly at 5 times the speed of sound. The United Nations has estimated that the number of civilians killed in the conflict so far is way in excess of the official figure of just over 3,000. From Odessa, our correspondent Caroline Davis has sent this report.
As Russia celebrated Victory Day, Odessa burned. This was one of the city's shopping centres, incinerated after a missile strike. The Ukrainian authorities said that 7 missiles were launched at the city yesterday, killing 1 person and injuring 5 more. This morning, the smell of burning plastic still hung in the air.
Last night when we were here, it was difficult to see the full extent of the damage, but this morning you can. The rocket has completely ripped into the back of the shopping centre here. You can see it's completely folded. There are still fires that the fire brigade here are trying to put out, and the electricity wires over on this side have been ripped away.
Russia has been targeting the port city of Odessa on Ukraine's southern coast. It's strategically important. Before the war, it was a key international port, taking Ukrainian products to the world. President Zelensky appealed again to end the war so that the port can reopen. Missile strikes don't only destroy infrastructure, they shake lives. 8-year-old Matby lives 300 metres from the strike. As we talk, he fiddles nervously with 2 pieces of blackened metal he found, shards of the missile. I heard a loud explosion, he says. I fell out of bed and started to cry. Then I ran down the corridor to find my dog Max. Mum tried to calm me down, but there were more explosions. We don't know what will happen next. The force of the blast smashed many of the windows in this block of flats. Fortunately, most were unoccupied. Katerina and her 2-year-old daughter, Arina, were on the other side of the courtyard. We were about to go to bed when the air alert began, she tells me. I heard a very loud explosion. I grabbed 2 pillows and covered my daughter's ears with them. I didn't want her to hear the sound of the explosion and be frightened by it. The whole house was shaking. Then she asks her daughter, "What do we do when we hear the air raid siren?" We run, she says. We run away. Young minds already used to living with the constant threat of war. Caroline Davis, BBC News, Odessa.
Boris Johnson will travel to Finland and Sweden tomorrow for talks about the war in Ukraine, along with long-standing concerns about the security of Europe more generally. It's widely expected that Finland will begin the process of joining the NATO defence alliance this week. Finland becoming a NATO member would significantly redraw the security map of Europe, and the prospect is already viewed with undisguised hostility in Moscow. From Finland, our special correspondent Alan Little sent this report, which does include some stark images.
Finland may be a small country, but it has one of the biggest armies in Europe. Defence and security are not just matters for the armed forces here, they are woven into the fabric of the civic life of the country.
We have a firm role in society. We still have a conscription, which means that majority of the Finns are somehow part of the national defence via their conscription and service.
And give me some sense of how big the Finnish armed forces are. How many service personnel could you mobilise in the event of a real national emergency?
208,000 is the figure right now.
From a population of 5 million?
Exactly.
That's huge, isn't it?
It is.
These are mostly conscript soldiers. They serve full-time for a year and will then do regular refresher training throughout their adult lives. For men, it's compulsory. Some women also volunteer.
I have 2 older brothers and my father also. So when they were in army, I just thought that if there was a war, I want to be there too. I don't want them to go, and I would stay home. I wanted to go too.
Today, little Finland is putting up such a savage defence as the modern world has rarely seen.
Finland's thinking about defence is still shaped by this, an attempt by the Soviet Union to invade and occupy the country in 1939. Finland's resistance, then, is an echo of Ukraine today.
Among the wreckage, the Finns found propaganda films, which were to have been shown in Helsinki after the Russians had taken the capital.
This is also 1940, the Winter War.
Yes, during the Winter War.
Annalisa Antila was a teenager in the city of Vyborg. The Soviets captured it and made it part of Russia. Finland never got it back. And did you witness some of the destruction yourself?
Kyllä totta kai minä.
Yes, of course, she told me. I was there when the bombs were falling. We had to get down on the floor. People were fleeing with their belongings. My mother and I were on the last bus to leave Vyborg. And are you still sad that it's a Russian town now?
Of course.
Finland's border with Russia is 800 miles long. Its accession to NATO would strengthen the alliance's military might right on Russia's doorstep. The trees beyond the frozen lake are in Russia. On the other side of this frontier, this further advance of NATO will be seen as more evidence of malign Western intent, as a direct threat to the security of Russia itself. Finland's army is already compatible with NATO. This is a British tank taking part in joint training exercises on Finnish soil already. For Finland was once part of the Russian Empire, and the spectre of a resurgent Russian imperialism has driven Finland into full alignment with the Western military alliance and is redrawing the security map of Europe. Alan Little, BBC News, Finland.
The podcaster Deborah James has revealed that she's now having end-of-life care at home following extensive treatment for bowel cancer, saying her body just can't continue anymore. The presenter of the BBC podcast You, Me and the Big C urged followers to donate to her fundraising page for clinical trials and research, which has raised almost £2 million in just 24 hours. Our health correspondent Catherine Burns has more details.
She says it's the message she never wanted to write. Last night, Deborah James posted on Instagram, "We've tried everything, but my body simply isn't playing ball." She used the message to set up a fund for cancer research and to help the charities that have supported her. Today, she gave this update to the BBC.
But 24 hours to do $1 million, I'm absolutely mind blown. And I just cannot thank people enough for their generosity, because it just means so much to me. It means it makes me feel utterly loved.
Most people with bowel cancer are diagnosed in their 60s. She was just 35 when she found out in 2016. Since then, she's raised awareness with a savvy, cheeky charm, including dressing up as a poo and posing on the toilet.
The lives that she has saved, is saving, will continue to save. Is nothing short of incredible.
Hello and welcome to You, Me and the Big C.
She's never shied away from the grimmer realities, especially on the You, Me and Big C podcast with Rachel Bland and Lauren Mahon. When Rachel died in 2018, Deborah paid tribute to her friend.
She's lived absolutely a worthwhile, purposeful, amazing life that's had an impact on so many people.
Over the last few months, Deborah has looked increasingly frail with long stays in hospital. Now she's back with her loved ones, including her 2 children, getting hospice at home care.
I think really it's just ultimately about the kind of hospice ethos of giving Deborah and her family that death that they can feel comfortable with and that will allow a very difficult time to be slightly easier.
Deborah says no one knows how long she has left, and she hopes that the money she's raising now will prevent anyone else going through what she's had to endure. Catherine Burns, BBC News.
By the way, you can hear more from Deborah on BBC Breakfast tomorrow, and the latest recording of her podcast, You, Me and the Big C, has been released tonight, and it is available on BBC Sounds. In Sri Lanka, security forces have been ordered to shoot anyone who's seen looting or damaging public property in the latest attempt to stop anti-government protests. Since last month, the country has been rocked by demonstrations over soaring prices, power cuts and lack of medicines. It's Sri Lanka's worst economic crisis since gaining independence back in 1948. Demonstrators are calling for the resignation of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and his brother, Mahinda Rajapaksa, stepped down as Prime Minister yesterday following violent street clashes. Protesters have defied a curfew. At least 8 people have died and 200 injured, as our correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan reports now.
A capital under curfew. Troops told to shoot at sight at anyone who damages public property or threatens lives. The skeletons of a bustling city, scorched by an economic crisis, reeling after a day of violence. Yesterday, supporters of the Prime Minister attacked anti-government protesters, who until that point had been peacefully demonstrating. At the city's main hospital, more than 200 of the wounded. Many were beaten up. This man fractured his leg after a tear gas canister landed on it. War veterans Ujit and Asanka are out of hospital. Men who lost their legs in mines during Sri Lanka's civil war say they were beaten up by the very people they made sacrifices for. They started punching me. I was left with only one crutch. They pushed me and I fell, Ujit said. When we served in the army, people used to pray for us. Now we're being attacked, Asanka said. With trust in the government shattered, the homes of at least 24 politicians who back the ruling party have been torched. This was one of the houses that was vandalised last night. It belonged to a supporter of the government, a local mayor, and this was the bedroom. It was set on fire. All you can see now is the metal that forms the coils of the mattress. And if we just move into the living room, completely trashed. Just look around. Tonight, a resort belonging to the son of Sri Lanka's former Prime Minister, Mahinda Rajapaksa, who quit yesterday, was set alight. And clashes broke out in the city of Negombo. Protesters want the president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, to resign. As long as he stays, tensions on this island will be inflamed. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Sri Lanka.
The High Court in London has heard that Rebecca Vardy had no choice but to bring a libel claim against Colleen Rooney to establish her innocence. The long-awaited trial involving the 2 footballers' wives is underway following allegations that Mrs Vardy leaked false stories about Mrs Rooney to the press. Our correspondent Colin Patterson has the latest for us.
Colleen Rooney arriving at the High Court accompanied by her husband Wayne Rooney for the start of a much-anticipated trial, which her legal team have summed up as being about betrayal. 1 minute later, Rebecca Vardy, who was suing her for libel, strode in, both women very used to cameras, but not the courtroom. Inside, Colleen Rooney sat next to her husband at one end of the front bench. No more than 10 feet away was Rebecca Vardy. There was almost zero eye contact between the 2 former friends. At the 2016 Euros, they had cheered on England together from the stands, but everything changed in October 2019 when Colleen Rooney did some online detective work to investigate who was leaking information about her to the press. She wrote 3 fictitious tales on her private Instagram stories, including ones about returning to TV and their basement flooding, to see if they would end up in the sun, and they did. Only then did Colleen reveal, after the use of 10 dots to ramp up the tension, that the one account she'd allowed access to read them was Rebecca Vardy's. In court today, we heard the details of Rebecca Vardy's case, that she'd been left with no choice but to bring this libel claim to establish her innocence and validate her reputation. It was stressed that this legal battle was being reported as entertainment, but in fact had had a hugely damaging impact on Rebecca Vardy's life.
And then it was the turn of Colleen Rooney's legal team to set out her case. They claimed that Rebecca Vardy's agent had leaked the stories, and this was like hiring a hitman. Although Rebecca Vardy hadn't pulled the trigger, she was still responsible. They also accused Rebecca Vardy's team of widespread and significant loss of evidence, including a phone being dropped into the North Sea.
Towards the end of the day, Rebecca Vardy was questioned and denied being the leak before being accused of having a history of selling stories to newspapers for money. The trial may have kicked off, but there's a long way to go, with Wayne Rooney himself expected to be called as a witness next week. Colin Patterson, BBC News, the High Court.
It's one of the most profitable gaming franchise deals in history, serving more than 150 million players around the world. For the best part of 30 years, Electronic Arts has enjoyed huge success with its FIFA series of titles. But now, the company says it is splitting from FIFA, football's governing body. Our gaming reporter, Stefan Powell, explains why.
EA Sports. It's in the game.
Since 1993, the FIFA video game franchise has been made by one company, EA Sports. The title has changed immeasurably on the screen and also off it, becoming a cultural powerhouse played by 150 million people around the world. But EA Sports has announced it's splitting from FIFA. It didn't fancy paying the reported $1 billion price tag to keep the licence from the governing body. It also sees the opportunity to broaden the title from beyond just gaming. Instead, EA Sports FC will launch in autumn 2023, with this year's FIFA being the last one. The move might surprise some, but it makes perfect sense to others.
It's where we're seeing games go as a whole, really, moving more into like games as a platform and bringing in other brands and like entertainment products such as concerts and sort of other live events into their games.
The FIFA president says he wants to assure players that the FIFA name will be the best one available for gamers, as it's the only global original title. They're working on new games. When it comes to EA Sports FC, players might not notice a huge difference to the core game's offering, with player likenesses and game modes staying the same. They will, though, see more brand partnerships and experiences beyond games. If that trend sticks, then this is a big moment, not just for a popular game studio, but potentially the industry. Stefan Powell, BBC News.
And that's it. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.